I've been trying to figure out a way to get this response video done in under 10 minutes, and I just can't do it. I hope you guys will stick around because I'm going to try and do a little bit of a point by point. And really, I'm not trying to attack this creator who is much larger than me, so I'm a little bit flattered that he would take the time to respond to my little old video. But I think there's a lot of misconceptions about libertarianism in his post, and I just want to clarify those things. So let's get started.
That should be the official Libertarian Party slogan, right?
I get the idea of not having a nanny state can be complicating to some people. And
why did you have to make my face so big? Did you have to zoom?
No one's confused. Nothing's complicated here. I mean, some people are, but it's not us. Pointing out that libertarians objectively have not even the slightest basic understanding of how government or society or economics or basic math work doesn't mean that we want a nanny state.
Okay, so I'm going to start right there. One of the things that I think a lot of people misunderstand about libertarians is that we don't have this knowledge of how government and all these things works, kind of like he's pointing out. One of the things I want you to consider when taking that point is that nobody's telling you to be a libertarian. Nobody on mainstream media is telling you to be a libertarian. Nobody in the schools, nobody in the colleges and universities are telling you to be libertarian. Libertarianism is something you have to come to on your own. Now, I've been around the Libertarian Party for a long time. And I can tell you that most of the time, libertarians started out as a Democrat or a Republican. It's not something they inherited from their parents either. And they came to it after going down some kind of a rabbit hole and doing a ton of research and a ton of reading. And most importantly, a bunch of soul searching, because becoming libertarian, from whether you are coming at libertarianism from the right or the left, requires you to challenge a lot of your preconceived, pre-held beliefs. And that's a hard thing to do. So most libertarians are actually pretty well informed and pretty well read on economics and history and the way that our government functions. So I think I don't know if he's just throwing shade or if he actually believes that, but if that's something that he believes, he probably hasn't engaged with a lot of libertarians in any kind of meaningful way.
It just means that libertarians can't distinguish the difference between their weird socioeconomic D&D fantasy land and the reality the rest of us live in. Because a state providing the basic necessities a society needs to function, roads, bridges, snow removal, healthcare, emergency services, that's not a nanny state.
So the government doesn't provide these things. Okay. And this is a common misconception. We talk about not understanding how government works. Government doesn't provide. Government puts a weapon to your head and says, pay us. And if you pay us, then we'll provide these things. The interesting thing about taxation is that at the end of the day, taxation is a way for government to convince you that society wouldn't pay for the things that we all agree need to be paid for, so that they can make you pay for things you would otherwise not pay for. Right? Massive foreign wars, a surveillance state that's monitoring all of our activities, this massive intervention in the government, corporate bailouts, all these things that we all hate. These are things that taxpayers pay for through force, because if we didn't pay for them, we wouldn't have roads. Of course we would have roads. Of course we would have infrastructure. Of course we would have schools. Of course we would have fire departments. People are going to pay for those things because we're all living together in a society. The idea that the only way to make society function is through force is silly to me. I mean, the idea that taxation is the price you pay to live in a civilized society, I would say that taxation is the price you pay for failing to build a civilized society, because at the end of the day, if the only way you can make your society function is under the threat of violence, you probably haven't built a very civilized society.
It's just a functional society. A nanny state would be like the government telling you what kind of clothes you can wear, or the types of food you're allowed to eat, the hobbies you can participate in, the places you can travel to.
I'd like to talk to you about passports, licensing, the FDA, and all the things that the government tells you can and cannot do. The fact that an 18-year-old can go $100,000 in debt. An 18-year-old can go and fight in a foreign war, but isn't allowed to smoke cigarettes or drink beer. Yeah, that's not a nanny state at all, I guess.
There's a huge difference between the government building us roads that we...
And I just want to say one of the constant things that libertarians always laugh at is, what would we do about roads if we didn't have a government? Like, there's no way we could possibly figure out how to create roads without government forcing us to pay for them, so that they can hire private companies, of course, to build the roads.
Used to drive on to go to a concert, and the government telling you can't go to a Metallica concert because heavy metal causes kids to sin and do crime or some shit. The only thing I find complicated is that you people actually believe that, community-funded fire departments are scary.
Again, there's this thing about libertarians amongst people who aren't really familiar with libertarianism, that we don't believe in communal action. I would challenge you to go out and look at the amount of charitable work libertarians do. Go search Spike Cohen and his You Are the Power organization, and all these libertarians, whether they're doing setting up food for the homeless or doing an adopt a highway or kind of more of the legal battles that Spike Cohen gets involved in, libertarians understand that if we're going to live in a society where the government isn't forcing us to engage, that we have to show people that we can function without that coercion, without that force. So one of the things about libertarianism that we understand is that the idea of personal freedom comes with a great deal of personal responsibility, and it's a responsibility to our society.
That is genuinely weird. Anyway, you were saying?
But to take a shot at libertarians and then to go and talk about Trump and conservatives the whole time is really just telling me you have no idea what libertarianism even is.
No, I'm well aware of what libertarians are. They're just Republicans who have even worse economic policy and want to be able to legally get high and have relations with children.
So we're just Republicans who want to get high and the relations with children thing is, I don't even want to get into that whole idiotic conversation that took place. But the fact that we're Republicans who just want to get high is pretty nuts, considering that the Libertarian Party was founded in 1979 in large part in response to the oppression that the LGBT community was going through. And by the way, we've supported gay rights since our founding in 1979. And in the 21st century, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Joe Biden have all said that marriage is between a man and a woman. But I guess we don't want to talk about that. And if you were engaged with the Libertarian Party in the post 9/11 era, you would see that libertarians were actually very closely linked to Democrats because we're an anti-war party. We opposed the Patriot Act. We opposed the TSA. We opposed the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security. We opposed warrantless wiretapping in the police state. One of the reasons we believe in the decriminalization of drugs is because the war on drugs has led to nothing but a giant militarized police force and the mass incarceration of, guess what, an overwhelming amount of disproportionate impact on African Americans in this country. So we say we just want to get high. Look, I'm not a drug user, but I understand that the war on drugs has an incredibly disproportionately negative impact on those living in poverty, and it needs to end so that we can address it for what it is, which is a mental health issue. So criticizing libertarians for wanting to end the drug war is probably the least progressive thing you could say.
Or they're privileged teenage to 20-something-year-old white dudes who have literally no idea what libertarianism is either.
And I think that these are the libertarians, these people who just call themselves libertarians, these 20-something-year-old white dudes, or whatever privileged people, that's who he's engaging with, because he doesn't seem to have a clear understanding of where libertarians are coming from.
But they call themselves one. But you're right, Trump's not a libertarian, so I shouldn't have spent all of that time talking about his policies when I was talking about libertarians. The funny thing is I was gonna talk about all of those libertarian policies the last libertarian president passed, but then I remembered there's never fucking been one.
And this is one of my great, terrible arguments against libertarianism, is that we've never been in power. First of all, you could look at the United States from probably the end of the Civil War all the way up to the 1930s, really 1913, but through the 1930s, this massive economic growth that the United States experienced and all these people coming out of poverty. And you would look at the policies and the form of government that we had at that time, from having a sound currency, a very small regulatory body at the federal level, at least. And you would say that economic miracle that was the United States grew up under a very libertarian type government, even though none of those people at the time were calling themselves libertarians. The idea that the corporate power structure now doesn't allow libertarians on the debate stage, doesn't want libertarians to take power, that we're not the ones who are being backed by billionaires and all this other stuff. It's really a badge of honor, the fact that the corporate owned power structures in our country today don't back libertarians.
Instead, I talked about Trump's policies because the video I was responding to was a libertarian shit-talking Kamala's economic policies, which seems to be a trend with libertarians. They spend a lot of fucking time shit-talking liberal economic policies they don't understand at all, but you all get real fucking quiet every time Republicans take away all those personal liberties you pretend to care so much about. And I hate to burst your bubble, but Gary...
I think I addressed libertarian stances on personal liberties earlier, but the interesting thing here is that he talks about, we're shitting on Kamala Harris's policies, liberal policies we don't understand. Here's some economic understanding for you. Democrats and Republicans are Keynesians, both of them. John Maynard Keynes would say that there's not a significant difference between a stimulus plan and a tax cut. They both believe that government should pull fiscal and monetary levers to control the economy. That is Keynesian. We come predominantly from the Austrian School of Economics, F.A. Hayek, to a lesser degree, Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, Murray Rothbard. These are the economists who kind of form our way of viewing the economic world. So we have a polar opposite view to both Republican and Democrat policies. The reason you're getting more criticism from the Libertarian Party on leftist type economic policies is because 12 of the last 16 years we've had a Democrat president. The power structures in this country seem to be leaning more to the left, and the left is in power. So that's what we're going to speak out against. But as I said earlier, in the post 9/11 era, I think you would have found that libertarians were very much aligned with Democrats in their anti-war, anti-surveillance state stance. And that was when we were very critical of Republican policies.
Gary Johnson isn't going to be president. So if y'all...
Gary Johnson hasn't run in 3 cycles. Our current nominee is Chase Oliver. Prior to that, it was Joe Jorgensen. And then, 12 years ago, it was Gary Johnson. So he's obviously not in tune with what's going on in the libertarian
spend
world.
all of your time shit-talking Democrats. You are, by extension, supporting Republicans. Which makes
And no, we don't have that binary view of politics. Yeah, I can not like Kamala Harris. That doesn't mean that I'm supporting Republicans. And if you taken any of my content, I've been very critical of Donald Trump. But here's the interesting thing. Joe Biden wants to put a bunch of tariffs on China. Hey, guess what Donald Trump wants to do? Put tariffs on China. Their economic policies are variances along the fray. There's not a significant economic departure from one party to the other. And that's the thing that I think a lot of Democrats and Republicans don't understand. They think that they're in this ideological fight between two economic visions for the country that are incredibly different. They're not. They're very similar economic. That's why we've had very similar economic results over the last 100 years in this country under Democrats and Republicans who pretty much believe the exact same thing from an economic perspective.
Sense, because y'all are just really Republicans who don't want to admit that you're Republicans because you're rightfully embarrassed to be considered Republican.
Yes, I'm embarrassed that I was a Republican, but I am not.
But all of us who don't fit into the traditional two-party system, myself included, only have one real option to make political change. And that's...
So let's just be perfectly clear. He fits into the two-party political system, very much so. And I think people like to say that so they can feel independent. But at the end of the day, if you're supporting these policies, if you agree enough with a Kamala Harris or a Donald Trump to vote for one of those two people, then you do in fact fit into the two-party political system. I don't have enough in common with either of those political candidates to vote for either one of them. So I haven't voted for a Republican since 2004, and I'm not going to vote for a Republican in this upcoming election.
To push for it within the parties that align most politically with our ideologies. Because it's going to come down to one of those two parties' policies.
We have two parties who support warfare. We have two parties who support nonstop deficit spending. We have two parties who believe that the government should be managing large sectors of the economy. There's not a significant difference here. The reason that our political discourse in this country has boiled down to essentially abortion, gun control, and transgenderism is because we don't have significant policy differences to talk about. So it's only these wedge issues that divide us into the two-party camp.
Policies, and whether you like it or not, you are supporting and attempting to influence in some way that policy. So those are the policies we have to talk about. But I know that can be complicated and scary for some people,
And I'll end it here because I was condescending at the beginning of my video. He's being condescending here by mirroring what I said. And look, I didn't mean to come off as condescending in my initial video. I do a lot of quick reacts to videos, especially if it's something that's anti-libertarian that I disagree with. So a lot of it's first react stuff, and maybe I should be a little bit more careful. I appreciate somebody with this size of a following for taking the time to respond to my video. I hope that I've cleared up some of the misconceptions about libertarianism, and follow me if you want more of that kind of content.